Step up your drawer building game by building a half-blind dovetail drawer box that features 5/8" solid wood sides, 1/2" plywood bottom, and soft close undermount slides. In this video, I'll show you step by step how to build this classic and functional drawer box. Before we begin, let's go over some of the essential tools you'll need. A table saw, a miter saw, a jointer, planer, dovetail jig, router with a dovetail bit, router table for cutting the dado, sander, 18 gauge brad nail gun, 18 gauge 1/4" crown staple gun. Let's go over what special hardware we'll use and how it affects the size of the drawer. For this video, I'll be using the Headage IW21 V6 full extension undermount soft close drawer slides, which I use and highly recommend. This system uses a pair of slides and right and left front fixing clips that mount to the underside of the drawer. The front fixing clips are offered in two sizes, a 1/2" or 5/8". We'll be using 5/8" clips, which are required for 5/8" thick drawer sides. With that out of the way, let's figure out the dimensions of our drawer box. Grab your tape measure and get the following dimensions: the inside cabinet width, the cabinet depth, and the cabinet opening height. Let's first take a look at the inside cabinet width measurement. Based on manufacturer specifications, the outside drawer box width is 3/8 inch less than the inside cabinet width. Since I measured 11 3/4 inch, my drawer box width will be 11 3/8. Next, we'll look at the cabinet depth, which I measured as 17.5 inches. Again, looking at the manufacturer's specs, my drawer box length is 15 inches. Just as a side note, drawer slide lengths are measured in 3-inch increments, starting at 9 inches and going up to 24. The last measurement we'll look at is the cabinet opening height, which is 4 inches. The manufacturer recommends a 3/16 inch clearance, which means our drawer box height needs to be a maximum of 3 3/16 inches. Before we use this measurement, let's look at the layout of the dovetails so we can make the drawer aesthetically pleasing. If the tails on the sideboard are cut, then when viewing from the top, it creates an unsightly joint. I would suggest making a mock-up and marking the areas that can be cut. Based on the mock-up, the drawer height needs to be between 3 3/8 inch. We'll use a higher value and make the drawer box height to 3 1/8 inch. With all the drawer box dimensions determined, we're ready to size all of the individual pieces. This drawer box is made from 5 pieces: the front board, left side board, right side board, back board, and bottom panel. Let's start with the easiest first. The front board dimensions are cut in length to the drawer box width, which we measured as 11 3/8, and to the height of the drawer box height of 3 1/8 inch. In order to determine the size of the left and right sides, we first need to get a dimension from our mock-up. This dimension is measured from the front edge of the front board to the edge of the tail on the sideboard as seen here. In this case, we measured 3/16 inch. Now, in order to get the overall sideboard length, we'll take the drawer box length of 15 inches and we'll subtract that 3/16 inch measurement from the mock-up, which results in a length of 14 13/16 inches. The drawer side height is the same as the front board height of 3 1/8 inches. The back dimensions are easy to calculate. The length is calculated by taking the drawer box width, which was 11 3/8, and subtracting the left and right side drawer thicknesses. In this case, both sideboards are 5/8 inch thick, so we'll subtract 11 3/8 inch from 1 1/4 inch to get the overall length of 10 1/8 inch. For now, we'll cut the backboard to the same height of the sides and front, which is 3 1/8 inch. This dimension will be modified later on in the process, but we'll get to that later on in the video. Now that we have the dimensions for all our boards, we can start the milling process. We'll get the dimensions for the bottom panel a bit later in the build process. First, I'll select a 4/4 maple board that is large enough to cut all the pieces. The board selected has a width of 7.5 inches and a length of 36 inches. First, I'll determine a rough length to cut the board. As seen here, my rough length will be calculated by adding the sideboard length of 14 13/16 inches plus the front board length of 11 3/8 inches, which equals 26 3/16 inches. I like to add an inch to that measurement in case of snipe or tear out, which can be cut out once the boards are cut to final dimensions. This results in a rough length of 27 3/16 inches. With a board cut to the rough length, we'll rip it to its rough width. I like the rough width to be about 1/4 inch larger than its final size. That would give us a rough width of 3 1/8 inches plus 1/4 inch, which equals 3 3/8 inch. With all the boards cut to their rough dimensions, it's time to begin the milling process. We'll start by squaring two sides of the board. This is accomplished by first surface planing one face of the board on the jointer. Then we'll edge joint the perpendicular edge, ensuring the plane edge is tight against the jointer fence. Now it's time to plane all boards to the final thickness of 5/8 inch using the thickness planer. Next, all boards are ripped to 3 3/16 inches, which is a 1/16 more than the final width. We'll use the thickness planer to mill down to the final width of 3 1/8 inch. I like doing this step since it removes saw marks left behind from the table saw blade. At last, we can cut all boards to their final dimensions. I'm using a miter saw for this step, but you could easily use a table saw with a miter jig to accomplish the same cut. With all the pieces cut to their final dimensions, we're ready to cut the dado for the bottom panel. Based on the manufacturer's specs, the bottom panel needs to have a clearance of 1/2 inch from the bottom edge of the drawer box to the bottom edge of the bottom panel as seen here. Since we're using a 1/2 inch plywood bottom panel, the top surface of the drawer needs to be milled 1 inch from the bottom drawer as seen. We'll make the dado 5/16 inch deep, which is half the thickness of the drawer sides. These dados can be cut using a stacked dado set on the table saw or using a straight router bit mounted on a router table. Either method works fine for this step. With the dado cut and all the pieces, we're ready to calculate the bottom panel dimensions. Keep in mind that it's aesthetically pleasing to have the grain direction of the bottom panel to be in the same direction as the front and back boards. So we'll calculate the width of the panel to be the drawer width minus twice the dado depth. Since we milled a 5/16 inch dado depth, then we'll subtract 5/8 from the drawer box width. That dimension calculates to be 11 3/8 of an inch minus 5/8, which equals 10 7/8 of an inch. I recommend reducing that dimension by a 1/16 of an inch to allow a bit of wiggle room. That brings the overall panel width to 10 13/16 inches. The bottom panel depth can be calculated by taking the drawer box depth and subtracting half of the drawer front thickness. That calculates to be 15 inches minus 5/16 of an inch, which results in a 14 11/16 inch step. Again, I like to subtract an additional 1/16 of an inch to allow wiggle room. This results in an overall drawer box depth of 14 5/8 inches. With these dimensions determined, we'll use the table saw to cut the panel to size. Next, we'll jump back to milling the backboard to the final dimension. The dado needs to be cut off the board so that the bottom panel can be fastened to the bottom edge of the board. We'll rip the board down using the table saw. Now we come to the fun part, cutting the dovetails. For this step, I'm using the Porter Cable 4212 dovetail jig with a 4211 half-blind sliding dovetail template installed. There are many options out on the market for dovetail jigs, so any of them should work similarly for this step. First, I loosely place the front board horizontally on the top of the jig. The dado needs to face the outside of the jig. Next, I mount the right side board vertically in the jig, ensuring the dado faces the left side of the jig. Take time to make sure both pieces are flush at the top and are tight against each other. Once both pieces are aligned correctly, lock them into position. Now we're ready to route. Take your time to make sure that the router stays flat against the jig. As you're making the cuts, make sure the bushing on the router stays tight up against the jig. Once you're done with routing, then remove the right side board from the jig and set it aside. Next, remove the front board from the jig and spin it around so the dado is located on the right side of the jig. Mount the left sideboard vertically, ensuring the dado faces the right side of the jig. Again, take your time to make sure both pieces are flush at the top and are tied against each other. Once both pieces are aligned correctly, lock them into position. Now you're ready to route. With all the boards routed, we're almost ready for assembly. Before we begin assembly, I like to sand the inside faces of the boards, including the drawer bottom panel. I recommend sanding them with 120 grit sandpaper. With all the pieces sanded, we're ready for assembly. I like to start by assembling the front and right side boards first. Make sure to apply glue in the joints before assembly. With the glue applied, join both pieces together. If needed, use a wooden mallet to tap the sideboard into the front board. Both faces should be flush together as possible. If the joint is loose, then I recommend nailing the joint with an 18 gauge nail, with the nail going from the front board into the sideboard. The nail holes will be covered by the face frame. Next, I move on to assemble the left side of the front board. I follow the same procedure as the right side. With all three sides together, we're ready to put in the drawer bottom. I find it easiest to place the assembly upright and slide the drawer bottom into the dado grooves. I make sure that the bottom panel is in the right orientation and that the sanded face is facing the right direction. Now we're ready for the back board. Make sure to place glue on the bottom and sides, and then place into the assembly. Align all the mating faces so that they're flush, and then nail both sides together with 18 gauge nails. The last step of assembly is to staple the bottom panel to the backboard. Before you staple, make sure the assembly is square by making sure the diagonal measurements are equal. I'm using a clamp to hold it square while I staple. I suggest using 1/4 inch crown 18 gauge staples that are at least an inch long for this step. Now that we completed the drawer box assembly, it's time to prep the drawer for undermount slides. First, I drill the rear mounting holes on the back of the drawer box, which will retain the rear mounting clips. I'm using an optional jig that the manufacturer offers with the system. I recommend buying the jig because it perfectly aligns the holes. The next step is to install the front mounting clips. These are sold as a pair and come labeled as left and right. Ensure the clips are oriented in the right directions and secure them to the drawer using 2 screws per clip. The manufacturer recommends using number 8 by 3/4 inch flathead screws. Now we're ready to do the final sanding for the drawer box. Before we start, I like to fill the nail holes and joints with wood filler. With the wood filler dry, I like to sand the sides first. Again, I recommend using 120 grit sandpaper for this step. Make sure to take your time and sand the faces smooth, especially at the dovetail joint. The next step is optional, but I like to sand the front and back of the drawer. It's likely no one will see it, but ultimately it's your choice. Next, we'll sand the bottom and top faces of the drawer box. I like to start with the bottom. Be careful, using an orbital sander with this step, the sharp edges have a way of catching and tearing the sandpaper. The last step is to ease the sharp edges of the drawer box. I use 120 grit sandpaper and lightly sand all the exposed edges and outside corners. Again, take your time and use your fingers to check the sharpness of the edges as you sand. The goal here is to eliminate sharp and jagged edges. With the drawer box done, let's turn our attention back to the cabinet. We need to prepare the cabinet for mounting the undermount slides. For this step, you can use rear mounting clips that are installed on the back panel of the cabinet, or fur out the sides of the cabinet so the opening is flush to the drawer opening. For this video, I'm furring out the cabinet sides using plywood pieces cut to the correct size and thickness. I suggest gluing and nailing the strips securely into the cabinet sides. Next, using a small square, I measure out where the front edge of the drawer sits relative to the face of the face frame. According to the manufacturer, use a 3/32 setback distance for overlaid drawer fronts. Please note, if you are installing an inset drawer front, you must add the thickness of the drawer front to that measurement. Next, I suggest making a temporary stilt for mounting the slides to the cabinet body. Measure from the top edge of the face frame to the bottom of the cabinet bottom, and then cut the stilt to that measurement. With the stilt cut and placed in the cabinet, place the slide in the cabinet and align it to the pencil marks on the face frame. With a self-centering drill bit, drill a hole for that front mounting location. Now, with that hole drilled, screw in a number 8 by 3/4 inch flathead screw in that location. Continue this procedure for the remaining screws. With one side of the slides installed, repeat the same procedure for the other side. With the slides mounted, you're ready to install the drawer box into the cabinet. Gently slide the drawer into the opening and push back firmly until you hear the front mounting clips click into the slides. Pull the drawer back out and ensure it's properly seated to the rear mounting holes. Give it a test to make sure it closes and works smoothly. I recommend applying a finish to your drawer box, such as polyurethane shellac or lacquer. That's it, you're done. Remember, I have links in the description to all the products that were used in this build. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos.